France's land forces are entering a decisive decade in which questions of mass, readiness, and long-term technological orientation are converging in ways that few French defense planners fully anticipated before the war in Ukraine. For years, Paris maintained the view that high technology, networked and expeditionary-ready capabilities would be sufficient to meet its operational commitments, especially in the Sahel and Middle East. Yet the return of high-intensity warfare on the European continent has forced a re-evaluation of the balance between quality and quantity. And nowhere is this tension more visible than in the evolution of France's Leclerc main battle tank fleet. The transition toward the future Main Ground Combat System, a Franco-German program intended to deliver a next-generation combat system in the 2035 to 2040 timeframe, has created a decade-long window of uncertainty in which France risks facing a temporary but significant capability gap. Understanding the architecture of this risk is essential for French audiences concerned about strategic autonomy and the credibility of national defense. The original Leclerc fleet consisted of 406 tanks, a number that already placed France at the lower end of the armor spectrum among major European powers. Years of budgetary constraints, operational rotations, and gradual drawdowns reduced the number of active and serviceable tanks well before the current modernization plans. The new modernization program, centered on the Leclerc XLR standard, aims to upgrade approximately 200 tanks with a comprehensive suite of digital improvements. These include full integration into the Scorpion battlefield network through the S6 Combat Information System, enhanced protection against roadside bombs and unmanned aerial systems, and improved connectivity with new generation platforms such as the Jaguar and Griffin. Technologically, the XLR represents a major leap forward. However, the numerical reality remains unchanged. Only half of the original fleet will enter this new standard, and the remainder will be cannibalized for spare parts to support the active XLR vehicles. This creates an unavoidable reduction in mass that is shaping concerns within French public and policy circles. From a purely qualitative perspective, Leclerc XLR is an excellent platform, fast, networked, and fully compatible with France's doctrine of high-tempo, multi-domain maneuver warfare. Yet a technologically superior tank fleet cannot compensate for numerical shortages in scenarios requiring large-scale force deployment. If France were asked to contribute a heavy brigade to a NATO operation in Eastern Europe, the limited number of operational XLR tanks would necessitate rapid rotations, increased wear, and a narrower margin for attrition. Moreover, the absence of a large reserve pool of older Leclercs undermines the ability to regenerate combat power during a prolonged conflict. For a country that champions the concept of strategic autonomy, this is a non-trivial vulnerability. The underlying reason France finds itself in this situation is the assumption that the main ground combat system would arrive on time and provide a seamless transition. However, the program has faced recurring delays caused by industrial disagreements between French and German firms, evolving operational requirements, and differing national visions for the future of armored warfare. Early expectations that MGCS would enter service around 2035 have been quietly revised, with many analysts now pointing toward 2040 or later. This delay extends France's dependence on the modernized Leclerc fleet well beyond its originally intended horizon, increasing pressure on the current stock and amplifying concerns about sustainability. French public sentiment reflects this duality of pride and unease. On one hand, there is genuine national pride in the Leclerc program. It remains one of the few European tanks fully designed, developed, and produced domestically. The XLR modernization is viewed as evidence that France retains advanced engineering and defense industrial capabilities. On the other hand, the war in Ukraine has triggered a shift in public expectations regarding national defense. Citizens, analysts, and commentators increasingly question whether a fleet of roughly 200 tanks can credibly support France's strategic commitments, especially when other European states are expanding or revitalizing their armored fleets. The perception that France might be too light in heavy armor is no longer confined to specialized defense circles. It has entered mainstream discussions. This concern is amplified by the nature of modern industrial readiness. Unlike the Cold War period, France no longer maintains a dormant but recoverable tank production line. Restarting full production of Leclerc chassis is economically prohibitive and technically difficult. Industrial tooling has shifted, skilled labor has diversified, and supply chains for specialized components are no longer intact. In a crisis scenario, France could not rapidly surge tank production to replace losses. This means that maintaining a sufficiently large and modernized fleet today is essential for the credibility of tomorrow's deterrence posture. The Army has sought to compensate for limited mass by enhancing networked lethality through the broader Scorpion program. Integration of sensors, data exchange systems, and digital coordination tools across platforms such as Griffon, Jaguar, Serval, and Leclerc, XLR, is intended to multiply the effectiveness of each vehicle. This approach aligns with France's doctrine of information-centric maneuver warfare. Yet even sophisticated networks cannot fully offset the immutable arithmetic of armored warfare. Certain missions require a minimum number of hulls, and operational endurance demands resilience against attrition. French military planners recognize this, but they must operate within tight budget allocations and political sensibilities that prioritize fiscal control. There are only a few realistic options to mitigate the gap. One possibility is expanding the number of Leclerc tanks upgraded to XLR standard, beyond the current target of approximately 200, though this would require additional budgetary commitment. Another option, heavily debated but politically sensitive, is temporary procurement or leasing of foreign tanks, such as the modern Leopard 2A8. This would be controversial in France, where autonomy in strategic systems is a long-standing pillar of defense identity. Accelerating MGCS through industrial restructuring or increasing funding is theoretically possible, but unlikely to yield short-term results. The more probable path is a combination of modest numerical reinforcement, improved maintenance cycles, and doctrinal adjustments that emphasize preserving the XLR fleet's readiness for high-intensity tasks. The decade ahead will test France's ability to balance technological ambition with operational realism. Paris is correct to pursue advanced, networked, and future-ready systems, yet must also acknowledge the strategic risks of entering a prolonged transition phase with reduced armored mass. The credibility of France's land forces depends not only on how modern each vehicle is, but on whether the Army possesses enough of them to absorb, resist, and continue fighting in the most demanding scenarios. As Europe rearms and the global security environment becomes less predictable, ensuring that the French Army is not left with a temporary but consequential capability deficit will be essential for preserving national autonomy, alliance commitments, and deterrence across the continent.